The fourth top five showdown of the season is looming. Will Penn State be fully healthy, and what type of trap awaits the Aggies? This is the College Game Day podcast for Wednesday, October 30th, the day before Halloween. None of us are masked. Rece Davis, Pete Thamel, and how about this? A sighting of Joseph Scott Galloway. You know, when I came on the Zoom to join the podcast this morning, Pete, I was greeted by Joey's, I started to say smiling countenance, but instead it was sort of jarring. I was having such a good morning, and then Joey was right there, right on my computer screen.
How long has this podcast been going on?
Well, thanks for your loyal listenership, Joey. We really appreciate that. But it's been going on. They did it differently. Pete and I have been doing it together, I think, 3 times a week? 2 years, Pete? 3 years? 3 years now. Yeah. Year number 3 now.
Years. It's amazing. I just got invited.
That is not true. We tried to get you on before, and you wouldn't respond to our producers, which
I don't remember that.
They do.
I don't listen to podcasts. I've never listened to one. I don't actually even know where you go to listen to one. But I am happy that you finally invited me on, and I'm happy to be here.
You know, Joey is Pete. I like to joke with Joey because I kid that Joey is the kind of guy that he will throw a rock and hide his hand and then laugh at the chaos that he caused. You know, he loves to throw a stink bomb into a crowd of people and then watch them scurry around and say, see what they're doing. And he's not only a great guy, he's one of the most talented guys we have. So all kidding aside, Joey and I constantly pick and nag at each other, but I'm glad you're on here, Joey. It's great to talk to you always.
I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this.
Let's start with, Joey and I did the ranking show last night. We have yet another top 5 game. You start looking at this, and I think Joey's made a really good point that whoever winds up in that 5 spot, probably in the playoff, it will be a Big Ten team. It would seem right now anyway. Penn State's occupying it if you use the AP rankings as the bracket. You would think that Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State might stand a pretty good chance of winding up, one of those 3 winding up in that 5 spot. But this game coming up in State College on Saturday, I think is going to tell us a lot about both teams, really. The big question is, can Penn State finally win a game like this? And it's a little bit unfair because he's been to the playoff a few times, but Ryan Day all of a sudden has gotten this burden of he feels like he needs to win a game like this and sort of step forward. What are you hearing right now? Is Penn State going to be at full strength? Is Drew Aller going to be able to go?
So his key practices, Rece, this week were Tuesday, Wednesday. And I think the fact that he's going to practice, the fact that sources told me there's nothing really structurally wrong with his knee, trends it towards him going to play and it being a pain threshold thing. Like, I don't think they're going to call zone reads for him. I don't think he's going to be 100%. But as it trends right now, that's where the expectation is for Penn State. That Drew Aller does play in this football game. It is a nice touch for Penn State that Bo Pribula came in and really was pretty dominant in that second half against Wisconsin. Really didn't flinch in the moment, and I think he ended up 11 of 13. Ran the ball pretty well too. Showed off that there's some known there in that backup spot in a big moment where maybe there wasn't before that. But come high noon on Saturday, we'll start with the expectation that Drew Aller is the starter for the Nittany
Lions. Joey, if you look at Penn State right now, and with Andy Kotelnicki at offensive coordinator, they've used Pribula and Drew Aller on the field together with a few gadget plays, and they've got a lot of eye candy or blizzard mixers, as Kotelnicki likes to call them, much in the same way that he used Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean together on the field when both were healthy at times at Kansas. What do you expect to see from the Penn State offense on Saturday against Ohio State?
So it's interesting, Pete. You just brought up that if Drew Aller does play, they may not go with a lot of zone read for Drew Aller. And so now that raises the question, when you're going against Ohio State's defense, if you saw one of the biggest plays in the game was a zone read. when Dylan Gabriel ran in the touchdown off the zone read.
Mm-hmm.
And when you watch the Ohio State defense, zone read is a problem. And so this is one of those interesting situations where it's like, boy, we really want Drew Aller back because he's our starting quarterback and he's played wonderfully. But if he can't run the zone read, and that would be a huge play for us against an Ohio State defense where the defensive ends like to crash down, then we may see Bo Perbula in this game more than we would think if Drew Aller is healthy, because I think that's a huge play for them, and they would want to run that play. Now, there's going to be some trick plays. If you've watched the Ohio State's defense over the last few years, Michigan has beat them with trick plays. And so those plays have been huge in these kinds of games, because if you're thinking to yourself, there are times we need to do a couple things in a game of this magnitude, flip the field a couple times, and score a couple touchdowns, easy touchdowns, not 12-play drives. Those are difficult in big games against tough teams. But if we can find a way to get a cheap big play, a cheap touchdown, something that we've utilized all year long, I always think that teams like Penn State that have played the kind of schedule they have and use a lot of trick plays, they're setting things up for the big games like this one. They've only played one ranked team, and that's Illinois. And so they've had some time to tinker with these trick plays in games to get ready for Ohio State.
Ohio State all of a sudden has some injury issues on the offensive front. Left tackle, they lost Josh Simmons in the Oregon game. They lost his replacement last week. Couldn't run it against Nebraska. Pete, how big a deal? How much shuffling have you heard? I mean, obviously they're doing some shuffling, but what will the Buckeyes offensive line look like from an injury standpoint Saturday?
Well, Ryan Day was coy this week, Rece, about the status of Zen Michalewski. He is the backup left tackle who has played in place of Josh Simmons and has had some good moments, but hasn't certainly been perfect or dominant or looked like a rock there. Simmons was trending towards being maybe a top 40, 50 pick in the NFL draft. So it's been a drop. And if he does not play, there's an interesting question. Donovan Jackson, the All-American guard, kicked out to left tackle. And that, he's their best offensive lineman. That is not his position. It's really not a position he's played since high school. So it will be interesting to see if Zen Michalewski does not play, and he was carted off the field, if I'm right, in the last game. Will they do a wholesale position change, put the very talented but inexperienced at that position, Donovan Jackson, at left tackle, and then let everything settle in from there. They would likely, if they kicked Donovan out, I think they would go Carson Hinsman at guard, and it would be Austin Severeld, who's a redshirt freshman, who's a talented young guy, and but that line has been a little bit in flux and will be a little bit in flux, and that is a bad place just from a sound cadence standpoint, and it's a bad front from a talent standpoint to be sort of experimenting and trying new things.
Let me run. Joey's laughing while Joey regains his composure. This is like all of a sudden he's realized Booger's trying to figure out the all-state playoff predictor. But I'm going to give you some numbers here in a second, Joey. What is it that's caught your attention here?
Hey, Rece, could you imagine coaching a football team going into your biggest game of the season, and that was a conversation you're having about your offensive line? I mean, that sounded like a mess. It sounded like we're going to flip a coin or two.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to figure out how to puzzle together an offensive line to go into the biggest game of our season on the road at Penn State. Like, I was hoping people was going to have some better information than that, because that sounded awful.
Here's something that will sound awful to you. One of our experts who works in True Media and one of our data providers, and this guy who used to work for ESPN, Jason Starrett, who's a brilliant data analyst.
Yep.
Here's something that Starrett has put out that is a little jarring for Ohio State fans with the loss of Josh Simmons. With Josh Simmons in games against Power 4 opponents this year, When Josh Simmons has been on the field, Ohio State has run the ball 79 times. They've averaged almost 6 yards a carry, nearly 4 yards a carry before contact. Only 11% of the plays have gone for no gain or a loss, and they've had 5 rushing touchdowns. When Simmons has been off the field, they've had 60 runs. They average just over 2 yards per carry. They average half a yard per carry before contact. 37% of the plays are stopped at or behind the line of scrimmage, and they have not run for a touchdown without Simmons on the field. Now, look, sometimes when you lose a guy in the middle and you lose him in the middle of the season, you need a little time to straighten things out. Sometimes things can be coincidence. Ohio State didn't play its best game for sure. No, Nebraska played great. They were desperate. They were embarrassed. Nebraska played well. I'm not trying to take credit away from Nebraska, but I think it's reasonable to say that Ohio State didn't play its best game against the Cornhuskers. So there are extenuating circumstances, but that's something that's real. You've messed up your line to the point that you cannot run with those 2 backs that they have back there, and with a Penn State defense that's disruptive and has been really good. Against the run and pretty good overall. It's a little daunting going into this game, I think, for Ohio State and being able to keep pressure off Will Howard and to be able to have the balance that they would like in terms of running the football.
I did have the long lineman there, Rece. Let me correct myself. Luke Montgomery, the backup left guard, slid in at guard for that game, and so if they did slide Donovan Jackson over, they would have a choice to make at guard, as Joey intimated. How much do they want to ruffle things? They go with Montgomery. Severall had started a couple games earlier this season, so yeah. But I don't disagree with the premise and the theory. And Abdul Carter is one of the most disruptive players in the country, who usually lines up over the left tackle.
And I bet he will a lot too. The other thing too is you've got a different defensive coordinator, and Penn State last year, even against Ohio State, sort of held its own on that side of the ball with Manny Diaz. But now Tom Allen, the former Indiana head coach, is their defensive coordinator, and they've continued. Probably nobody's quite the same stylistically as Manny is, but they're still really disruptive. They still get negative plays. They stop the run. They've been really good on defense.
So this is interesting to me because for years, when we had talked about the transfer portal and people leaving schools, it was all about quarterbacks. And it was like nobody's going to have a backup quarterback. And I think now as we've moved more into the transfer portal, we're starting to see the effect of the other positions. Now when you watch Ohio State, you lose a couple offensive linemen, who's backing those guys up? Who are you bringing in? Because the guys that think they should be playing are leaving now. Like everybody's leaving. So if you get a couple injuries to a certain position, it could mean death because you don't have those guys anymore. And even when you watch, and I know you guys watched like Georgia play Texas or Alabama this season, we're used to seeing Georgia, Alabama, all these SEC schools rotate like 8 defensive linemen. And the guys they were rotating in were the first round all-stars for the next season as these first rounders left. So now we're in transfer portal time, and no longer do they have 8 to roll in. Now it's a little different role of guys. And so they get to these second halves, and you see them get worn down some. You see them get a little tired. Therefore, a span in the Texas-Georgia game, the Georgia defense had gotten a little tired. They caught their breath when the fans started throwing stuff on the field. And it was like, George's like, this is because now we get to breathe. Because Texas had gotten on a little run there. And this is the same thing we're seeing for Ohio State now. You don't have a lot of depth at position. So if you lose a couple guys, it could mean big problems. And again, give Nebraska credit, like you said, Rece. They played well. But when you watched the middle, when you watched the lines, it was like, man, if Nebraska could have penetrated Indiana like this, it would have been a different game. You play in the opponent's backfield and you're going to disrupt the game like they did. And a team with two great running backs end up running for 64 yards.
We've talked a lot about the X's and the O's, the personnel, the things like that. Joey, you're intimately familiar with how the Buckeye faithful will react. Let's say, and I'm not predicting this yet. That's for the podcast later this week. Let's say, just for instance, that Penn State wins the game, and Ohio State, with this $20 million roster or whatever it is, probably still in good shape to make the playoff. But now, staring at Indiana and even Michigan in a rivalry game, and knowing that they have to win those games, or they probably won't be in the playoff. How do you describe? What do you think from living in the area, from going to school there, from understanding Ohio State people? What's the level of pressure like on Ohio State to win this game?
The earth is starting to shake, Rece. This is you can see the clouds moving in, and it has a lot to do with, unfortunately, the NIL money. Because now what we're doing is like the same in baseball. Like, you expect the Dodgers, the Mets, the Yankees, the people who have spent a ton of money to be in it at the end. And so if you become these teams that spend a ton of money, you expect to be in. And so you don't get to have any excuses. You don't get to say, hey, we had injuries. We couldn't do certain. Nobody wants to hear that, because they wrote a check. All they know is they wrote a check, and doggone it, they expect results from that check. And so we've moved into a world where everyone expects everyone to win. Everyone expects. Let me dial back. I've been a huge fan of Dabo Swinney in his "I'm going to stand firm and it's the way I want to do it." And I've argued
You and me,
this.
Joey.
I've seriously had these arguments with people that are claiming that he's doing it the wrong way and everyone else is doing it the right way. Well, what are the right way people have to show for it? Let's just say, and I don't want to, again, this is but let's just say Ohio State doesn't win this game and doesn't get in the playoffs. Are they doing it the right way? Is all these teams that don't win a national championship this year, are they doing it the right way, spending all this money, and what do you have to show for it? And so, yes, things are getting tight here in Columbus. You're going to continue to get tight here in Columbus, because this is a roster that has spent a lot of money, and people don't care if guys got hurt. And that affects what you can do offensively. They don't care. And yes, the pressure is picking up here in Columbus.
Let me ask you this, Joey. Schematically, if your offensive line is not going to give you an advantage, and if the run game is going to be a slog, and you have the personnel that Ohio State does, you have a running quarterback, you've got two dynamic tailbacks, you've obviously got elite skill on the outside. How do you mitigate the expected damage up front and still run a successful offense?
A couple of things in football you can't get around. You cannot get around a bad offensive line. Because to get the ball to those skill guys, you got to have time to get it to them. You can't get around a bad defensive line. And that's why everyone talks about the trenches. They don't get all the credit all the time, but what they do allows the rest of us to do what we do. I used to always come off the field, and like when we couldn't run the ball, when I played for Tampa with John Gruden, I come off the field like, hey, Gruden, man, I am open. Throw me the daggone ball. And he would look at me with that snarl, and he would use some language I'm not going to use here because I don't know what the rules are on podcasts. But basically he would say, I would love to throw you the ball. I'm trying to throw you the ball. We can't block the guys up front so that we can throw you the ball. So when you struggle in the trenches, you basically end up playing like 7-on-7. And if we're going to play 7-on-7, anyone can win. Nebraska can beat Ohio State in 7-on-7 because now we've taken out the physicality. So now what you're saying to Ohio State is you're not going to be as physical up front. You can't use two of the best players in college football and Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Hey, look, you can't use those two, okay? Now let's go see. It's tough. It's a balance you got to try to put together without the ability to kick someone in the teeth. Almost said another bad word, Rece. Here we go.
You can say that one on podcast if you want to.
Okay.
There is a strategy for Ohio State, and I think I might have told Pete this before. Um, a lot of my friends and guys, I went to school with and know from Alabama back in the 2020 season. You know how Alabama people punctuate everything or greet each other with the roll tide, and Ohio State people greet each other in airports by going OH and then IO.
Mhm.
When in 2020, that phrase roll tide was replaced by the phrase throw it to six, meaning Devontae Smith. Doesn't matter. I don't care what's happening. It doesn't matter what else is going on. Throw it to six. I might suggest that the answer for Ohio State, no matter what else is wrong for. I mean, I know Ibuka is a stud too. They've got other guys, but throwing it to Jeremiah Smith, no matter what, get it out quick if you have to, if you can't block him. Throw it down, heave it up, and let him go get it at least once or twice a game. Obviously, I'm being somewhat facetious, but he's the kind of guy that in games like this can kind of change everything if you can get just enough time to get the pass off and to let him have an opportunity to change the game. So throw it to four, Joey.
Joey, let me ask you this. You've obviously been a great Ohio State receiver and then lived through a run of very good receivers. And I would say in the last 8 years, to use an arbitrary number, probably like a golden age of Ohio State receivers in terms of the talent and the volume under Brian Hartline, the consistent first round picks, probably the best room in the country. Can you contextualize for us with your, 20 plus years of Buckeye receivers as your purview, where Jeremiah Smith fits in this early, being this talented, and how you see his ceiling?
I haven't seen a guy show up that looks like him. All of the great ones before him showed up looking like freshmen and then developed into grown men. He showed up looking like a grown man. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't actually know who he was when I went to my first practice. Unlike you two, I'm not locked in all the time on like rosters and things like that. So I literally just go out there. I'm high-fiving. Hey, Chip Kelly. I hadn't seen Chip since he left ESPN. We're hugging. We're high-fiving, me and Coach Day, and we're just having a good old time. Then I seen this grown man run a route. I'm like, oh, interesting. And he went and he ran this route, and they didn't have pads on. And one of the defensive backs knocked him down. Like sort of pushed him, knocked him down. So I go over to speak to this kid because I'm here at practice and I was in this room one time. I just know he's a young kid. So I say to him, hey man, we don't have pads on. It's up to you to let that guy know. Do not push me down without pads on because defensive backs are annoying. And they do these kind of things without pads on. They're trying to get under your skin and send you a message. So as a receiver, you got to send that message back. If you push me down again without my pads on, I'm going to punch you in the face mask. It ain't going to hurt, but I'm going to send a message. So when I told him this, I'm like, hey, man, don't do that. Do not let them push you down without pads on. And he nodded like, yep, okay. From that moment, there was no more pushing him down. And I was like, and again, when I talked to him, I didn't know who he was at the moment. After I spoke to him and the way he answered me made me go find out who is this guy because I like him. He already has that dog in him that's like, okay, I got this. And I saw it was him. I was like, that's why. He's different. And he's going to be different. And Rece, I agree with you. As many times you can throw him the ball. The problem, if there is one in these kind of situations, these kind of games, if you can make a team one-dimensional, and that's always thrown around. And I don't know that people know the importance of I can get the ball to my best guy 10 times if I can prove to a defense I can do something else when I need to. But if I show you I can only get it to him, the good teams are going to beat you. Not the bad teams, not the average teams, not the teams that are marked. The good teams, because they have scholarship players too to get a lot of NIL money, can say, you two guys go take care of number 4. And he may beat us once or twice a game, but the time they spend trying to get him the ball is going to mean that they only got 2 good drives in this entire game. And we're good enough on the other side to go score 21, 28 points.
Well, and that's the beauty of the weapons that Ohio State has. Obviously, Ibuka's had some huge games. If they can get the running backs involved, it's going to be fine. You said good teams. Penn State's a good team. There's no doubt about that. The question about Penn State is, can they be a great team? And, the record with under James Franklin against top 5 teams is 1-12. Since 2000, Penn State under anyone is 1-22. The only game they've won like this is the 2016 game against Ohio State, where they returned the blocked field goal for a touchdown and ended up winning the Big Ten. So Penn State needs to prove that it's a good team and can win this game. Let's talk about a couple of other games. And Joey, this is a game that's under the radar, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I do want to get to Texas A&M, South Carolina. But you mentioned people being upset, people paying the NIL money and then not having what they expected to show for it.
Yes.
The next 2 weeks are huge for Ole Miss in that regard, because Ole Miss, I'm not suggesting Ole Miss spent the money that Texas or Ohio State did, but they have been very active and they filled holes on defense. They're better and really good on defense than they've been. But here they are going into a tricky spot at Arkansas, Georgia next week, and they already have 2 losses. This is a big 2 weeks for Ole Miss, because it could be, if they can't navigate Arkansas, then the Georgia game is nothing more than run-of-the-mill vintage Ole Miss. Can they upset somebody? And nothing has really changed. The identity of Ole Miss sort of hangs in the balance the next 2 weeks. They're still good. Even if they lose both, they're still a good team and a good program. I don't want that misunderstood. But the question is, have they taken a step? Okay, they tripped and fell, against Kentucky. That's a bad loss. You spin that any way you want to. That's a bad loss. And then they had a wild, weird game that they probably should have won, but things happen, against LSU. That one, not as concerned about. The bad loss is what's killing them right now and has put them in this position that Saturday against Arkansas and the next Saturday against Georgia, we find out, have they really made progress, or are they still just good?
Yeah, and I think, Rece, what a snake pit 11 a.m. in Fayetteville is for that. And with Taylor Green, who's simply put one of the best athletes in the SEC, he is a huge problem. He can beat you with his legs. I don't think Jaquinda Jackson is going to play in that game. I believe I read that this week, the talented tailback for Arkansas. But look what happened to Tennessee when they went in there. Their fortunes just went kapoof. They were headlong on winning the SEC. They obviously had they have the great defense, but Arkansas has answers, and I give Sam Pittman a lot of credit. Like there were some clenched noses when he hired Bobby Petrino, and it has been a pretty quiet season for Bobby Petrino if we think about it here in Week 10, Rece, right? Have we heard anything from Bobby other than they've moved the ball okay? Like, it's kind of been pretty.
I haven't heard anything directly from him, but his quarterback is like third in the third in the nation, third in the SEC in total offense, I think. So that part's been pretty good. Yeah, third in the SEC in total offense in Green.
Yeah, it's been pretty benign, and Arkansas showed the night against Tennessee that Travis Williams can concoct a defense that can stop an explosive offense. So again, one of the litmuses of these NIL super teams is what happens when there isn't much to play for, right? And Ole Miss is now a borderline playoff team. The moment they lose next, they are out of the playoff. And then it becomes a really interesting experiment. Lane's been very open over the last few years talking about that. talking about how to keep guys motivated when they're there for short term and how it's a different coach. My line to coaches now is like they're all junior college coaches. Like you're pretty much coaching guys for 2 years, right? Like that's just what it is. There's no, Tony Bennett fantasy land where you bring them in and you get them as juniors in high school and you raise them up and no, it's gone. It's not happening. And Joey mentioned it earlier with, talented twos aren't as prevalent as they used to be because they're going to scoot off and go play. Playing time has become the new North Star. And we've seen that in recruiting. We've seen that too. Look at Joe Royer, for example. Joey is a good example. He's a former backup tight end at Ohio State. He went to Cincinnati. He's like a top 100 NFL draft pick. He's one of the top 5 tight ends, and he just didn't have the clearance because there was traffic in front of him. So he made a great business decision to go to Cincinnati. He's been part of that really strong Bearcat team this season.
When I think about Ole Miss, it is not just the position they're in, but the way it's trended they've lost 2 of their last 4. And so when you start to think, okay, we're trending in a bad direction, the offense has not been the same against SEC teams as it was before they started playing SEC teams. They haven't put up the same amount of points. It just hasn't looked as flashy. And for what we know of Lane Kiffin, that's his calling card. It's offense and what he does with it and the points, the yards, the big play capabilities, all these things. And that's trending in a bad direction. And so now you have Arkansas and Georgia, and you've already lost 2 out of your last 4. This thing could go off the rails really quickly here and look really bad at the end. And then you're right. Now it's time to pay the piper because all those people to write those checks, they want answers at the end. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of all time, when 12 teams go to a playoff, and this is looming for every coach out there, the James Franklins, the Ryan Days, the Lane Kiffins, when 12 teams now go to a playoff, everybody thinks that their team is good enough to be in because, hey, now we expanded to 12. Before it was just 4, so that was tough. Now it's 12. If we can't get in 12 with all the money we're putting into this thing, there's going to be some heads rolling.
There will be some discontent. And a lot of places, for sure. There is zero discontent in College Station right now. Texas A&M, I don't know if you guys know this, but Texas A&M is a real program. It's a real rough, tough A&M stuff. It's not, some fast-talking politician BSing around. This is a real deal that Mike Elko has going in College Station, and they are riding high. I mean, they beat LSU. Frenzied Aggies, swaying all over the place, sawing varsity's horns off, showing Brian Kelly what's up, ready for Texas to come in there. Look out, Aggies. Look out. Going into South Carolina, you've got quarterback issue. If you go to Marcel Reed, can he execute in the passing game, which was one of the reasons they went back to Connor Wigman in the first place? South Carolina's 3rd in the nation in sacks with those 2 dudes coming off the edge and Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart. Aggies have been tested for sure, but South Carolina is really, really close to having a much better record in a much better season. They had Alabama, they had a shot at Alabama. They certainly had a shot at LSU and let it get away. You take those 2 and turn them around, and South Carolina's season looks a lot different. You only have to go back 2 years to see what they can do in that environment with not even, in my judgment, not even nearly as good a team as they have this year overall. Probably a, more seasoned quarterback play with Spencer Rattler when they beat Tennessee a couple of years ago. But overall, I think this is a better team, certainly a better defense. Aggies better be careful Saturday night going into Columbia, I think, Pete. I think this is the kind of game that teams all season long have lost. Now the teams at the very top, Ohio State, Georgia, although Alabama certainly slipped since then, Texas, they've lost big-time matchups. Everybody else has found a way to lose a game just like this. And I think they better be really careful. They don't have to be careful. They better play well. They better show up ready to go and be on their A game because South Carolina is going to bring it. And they've got some strengths that I think can exploit some of the Aggies' weaknesses there.
So my analogy for this season, Rece, is gonna be an analogy back to your era. You will appreciate this. College football.
You act like you're so much younger than I am. How old are you, Pete?
I'm 46.
Okay, a little bit, but not a ton.
Yeah.
Joey,
Yeah,
don't let him talk to us like that.
Oh, so me and Pete the same thing.
That's all.
Well,
like it's just
Joey's an old soul like me. Joey's an old soul like me.
Me and Pete are the same age. I get it.
Oh yeah, you're such a liar.
So Joey will get my analogy here. All right. College football 2024 is like a sandwich from Scooby-Doo. Remember Scooby-Doo would make a big sandwich and then he would like compress it all down like this and make it edible. Well, the Alabama focaccia on the top and the Vanderbilt crust on the bottom used to be a big old sandwich before it was squished. And now, because of NIL and Diego Pavia and everything in the middle, everything is now like a panini. All right. It's not like a big old North End, like, fluffy bread sandwich. It is pressed hot down on the griddle. So give A&M credit for not stepping on the rake. I will say one thing about the other night, Rece, is Bill Bonnell, the director of that game, who's the best at what he does, took a pullback shot at some point, and I had not seen Kyle Field alive like that since Johnny Manziel was there. So give Mike Elko credit. Like,
oh yeah,
it has been, to harness the energy of that place has been one of the most vexing equations in college football. It's been the Goodwill Hunting equation. Like, there's just been the answers are there, but nobody has been able to find them. And Mike Elko, in fairly short order at this moment, has harnessed that energy and translated it to a little recruiting run this weekend. You can feel it teaming and going up. The warning sign for me going into Columbia, and look, he's pulled the string on all these quarterback moves very deftly.
Perfectly.
Right? I don't know if anybody has managed a complicated situation better, but like this the little secret of the A&M quarterback situation is like they don't really have one, and they have two very different ones. And so the deception and the preparation, LSU clearly didn't prepare for Marcel Reed, and Mike Elko wasn't gonna let that gift go to waste. South Carolina will be prepared for Marcel Reed. They face a version of Marcel Reed in practice every day. He and Lenore Sellers are similar style players, runners, etc. So it will be very interesting to see if they end up using both on Saturday, which I think it just looms as a possibility, because I don't think there's not a clear, linear, no-brainer decision, right? So does now this, from being a little bit defined, and some of that was because of Wegman's injury, does this go back to like a la carte? And that's enough food analogies from me. But I think it's a fascinating spot, and it will be, he's made A&M interesting, and all of college football has that Texas game circled on their calendar. That was circled on our calendars for nostalgia and for revitalizing the hatred that defines that rivalry. Now it's circled on our calendars because there's going to be giant SEC and playoff implications.
We even had Joey on the ranking show last night. Texas A&M. If you use the current AP rankings and the playoff formula, they would play each other again. So we could have, there has been plenty of talk about them playing back-to-back weeks, depending on how things play out, if they were to both make the SEC championship game. But this is a challenge, and I do expect Elko, either by design or necessity, to use both quarterbacks on Saturday night against South Carolina.
This doesn't feel great to me. Like, when I look at Texas A&M, they're winning. It doesn't feel great to me. When you're still trying to figure out quarterbacks, that doesn't feel great to me. If Nussmeier doesn't start throwing the ball to Texas A&M in that game, we're having a different conversation. I mean, he literally started throwing it to them. And it was like, what? Like, he threw it to
that one when he was going left and threw back into the middle of the field. I think that was the first one in the second.
Yes.
That changed the whole game.
Yeah.
It changed everything. Yeah.
That's teach tape bad interception.
Yeah. And so great story. I love it. No one thought after week one, after losing Notre Dame, that Texas A&M would be in this spot. And now we're here, and it's a great story, and let's go. But it don't feel great. If they were to lose at South Carolina, I don't know who would be real surprised, because in their games, it looks like it could go either way. They find a way to win, but it looks like, hey, it could have went the other way. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if they do lose at South Carolina.
Let's hit one more game that's a little bit off the radar before we go, because I think these two teams come in both unbeaten in ACC play. And I think each of them just won two of the weirdest games of the season. Pittsburgh and SMU. I think Thursday night, most people saw what Pittsburgh did to Syracuse. It was 3 pick sixes, I think 5 interceptions overall, I think, if memory serves. And they blew them out. Didn't really do anything on offense, but in fairness, they didn't really have to. SMU, on the other hand, became the first team since 2011 to win a game despite losing the turnover battle 0-6. They were 6-0 down in turnovers and had one of the most athletic plays of the season when a defensive lineman jumped over the Duke protection unit and blocked what would have been a game-winning field goal and stopped a 2-point conversion and still remained unbeaten in ACC play. So now Pittsburgh's unbeaten overall. SMU is unbeaten only with a loss to BYU. That's certainly not a bad loss. It was on the road. But speaking of it feeling weird, like you said with Texas A&M, Pete, it feels a little weird for both of Pittsburgh with all of the comebacks early in the season, now all of the pick sixes and the shark linebacker unit that they're calling it. SMU was lucky, and I was foolishly watching that game a lot because it was my Superdog game. So I was like, why am I watching this awful game? And it was an awful game. SMU was lucky they didn't turn the ball over 8 or 9 times. They had 2 or 3 more times the ball's just on the ground and it rolled to them after they'd fumbled it themselves. I mean, it was a very sloppy performance by SMU, and they were very fortunate to live to tell about it.
Yeah, so interesting in that game, Rece, both of the quarterbacks' status is in flux. Eli Holstein, who obviously is the Alabama transfer, who's been a big part of this Pitt offensive revival with OC Cade Bell. Pat Narduzzi gave him a wait and see. He banged his head against the turf late in that Syracuse game. And then Rhett Lashley said on Monday that Kevin Jennings is going to be questionable for that game. So just as, now look, both of them have very seasoned backups, which is pretty rare in college football. Preston Stone for SMU started a bunch of games, started the season as a starter. Big time recruit. He's played plenty of good football for SMU. And Nate Yarnell has been around Pitt for a long time. He started games. He's a good player as well. He was in a neck and neck battle with Holstein all in camp that he ended up losing. So I just think for that game and how that game plays out, those are going to be two huge variables to watch.
This is an interesting game to me also, Rece, and it sort of both teams give you that same feel a lot. That we'll call it the Texas A&M feel, where a game could go one way or the other, and somehow they keep winning, and it's like, well, terrific. They're winning, and that's great. When Pitt played Syracuse, I don't know what it is, but when a team dominates a game defensively, to me, that is the best football to watch. I love to see a defense get hot, a defensive play caller get hot, start sending his people at the right time, at the right place to create havoc. I love that. So now it sets up this interesting game. And I think Pitt's getting 7.5 points in this game. It's something like when I looked the other day, because just looking for fun, I think Pitt was getting like 7.5 points in this game. And I'm like, interesting, because I want to know what Vegas thinks. Well, let me see what Vegas is thinking about this game that is very interesting, and you really don't know how it's going to go. And so Pitt's getting these points. But I really like Pitt, and I like their attitude. I like when a team is led by defense and the way they're playing, that team can beat a lot of people. And Rece, you made me chuckle when you said that SMU was your super dog.
But Duke was. So they covered, but I could have gotten that. So I got the cover.
So in those situations, it made me laugh because you don't have to have any money riding on it. But if you pick a game, you are locked in. Like it really, truly matters. And I do this every Saturday. Like I took the Iowa over, and I am watching every snap.
That was a terrible football game.
Yeah. It was awful, but they hit the over. So that makes it great. These games that we pick that you would think don't matter, oh, they matter. They matter.
The silliest thing about it is we do that Superdog segment, and the entire idea of the Superdog thing on game day. Honestly, the other guys don't believe this, but this is true. The reason the segment is there is to have a little fun, yes, but also to throw a little shine toward a game that we really haven't spent a lot of time on, right? Is to pick a game that maybe is not quite as prominently featured in the rundown. Maybe there's a little storyline somewhere, outside the Power Four conferences, or a Power Four game that hadn't gotten the attention it wanted. So that was why I went with Duke. I always wait till everybody else picks. Sometimes the guys, because they want to win. Sure, I want to win too. That's why I was watching that game the other night. But I never duplicate picks because I want to get more games, more games mentioned. So you do that, and I'm watching, the real games on my laptop and on my television at home. But my attention is on my phone. And the SMU Duke game, and I'm like, every now and then you'll have these moments of clarity. You're like, what am I doing? It doesn't make any difference. Why do I care? And yet you still do it.
Absolutely right. I am watching Iowa, Northwestern.
Like, why?
We have a huge TV with great games on, and I am locked in. Iowa, Northwestern. Let's go. Another 6-yard gain. We're going to 3rd and 4. Let's go.
I blame Herb Street. I blame Herb Street for mine. It's his fault. True guy.
I had a $4 up on Saturday night, none of which for SMU Duke, and we're in a group text with some game day guys, and Rece is giving like play-by-play of SMU Duke, and I'm like, well, what are you doing? Like, I'm watching like Texas A&M LSU, like pretty important game, right? Like, yeah. Wisconsin game was on.
Texas A&M LSU was on the big screen.
Okay.
I mean, it was on the big screen.
Fair enough. But your attention wasn't there.
No, I know it. I was back and forth. I was like, what are they doing? Oh well. Anyway, it was fun. Joey, great to have you on, my friend. Are you ready to pick the game? You're going to pick Ohio State, Penn State before you go here, or are you saving that for television?
Hey, Rece, I do a really good segment on ESPN Bet on Saturdays. And so I am batting this thing back and forth right now. I am not prepared to make a pick, except I do think that this is going to be a field goal. Like, I don't think this is big one way. I think it's going to be a field goal. And let me just say this. I think Penn State has the advantage. They have the advantage. They're at home. Ohio State coming off the Oregon game, bye week, bad game against Nebraska. Didn't feel great about it. Now they go on the road to Penn State. I think Penn State has the advantage, but I'm not yet ready to lock in which direction I'm going in.
They've had some weird games at Penn State. I'm sure you'll get into that on Saturday, Rece. But they've had some weird games. The block punt game, there was, I think was it Noah Brown sort of streaking out of nowhere for like, Ohio State was hapless for 3 quarters under Urban there. One time, the JTT game last year, they were dead in the water. And the score ended up lopsided, but that game was not lopsided at all.
A little tip from an expert, Joey. If you want to get the legal suits all bent out of shape and twisting, try to make a joke on that whole ESPN Bet segment about using the phrase risk-free investing when it's obviously to anyone with 2 functioning brain cells that it's a joke, and then watch them get all twisted and bent out of shape about that. And a lot of people too, because gambling's wrong. You should only do this for entertainment purposes.
Absolutely right.
This is, it's like the old David Letterman thing when he used to say, this is purely for entertainment purposes, not a competition. So please, no wagering.
Absolutely right. I agree.
But you can always bet on this podcast delivering. We thank you for listening. Download wherever you prefer to get your podcast, or better yet, subscribe. You never miss an episode, and you never miss a rare episode when our friend Joseph Scott Galloway drops by. We'll talk to you next time.